Hello and welcome to Property Matters on Dublin South FM and iPropertyRadio with Carol Tell and myself, Brian Fox. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So before we get started, a quick note of welcome to our new series producer, Breed Malloy. Let's just say you're very welcome to the team, Breed. First up today, we're delighted to welcome back Patrick Folan, Director with IAm Sold Auction House. So Patrick, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. It's been a while since we spoke, a few years, I think.
Yes,
a lot has happened in the meantime.
Hopefully we're back in stride again of program making and so forth, and there's not going to be another resurgence. We won't talk about COVID at the moment. What I first want to ask you is, how is the current auction market faring?
It's definitely a changing market. I suppose from about mid to end May, we found a big uptake or uplift in the number of agents introducing properties onto the platform. So from maybe around 10 a week, it jumped to 20 plus per week. Out of the blue, maybe surprising ourselves a little bit. So just suddenly there seemed to be a bit more anxiety amongst vendors looking to move things a bit faster for various different reasons. Probably a big part of it, I suppose the newspaper reports and the general sentiment out there that things might be changing a little bit. So definitely vendors are looking for a faster, maybe more secure route to market. So hence we see an uplift from that. And then from the buying pool, it's definitely softened. Not to a level that would worry us hugely, but from maybe the last 12 to 18 months has been very high volumes of inquiries, very quick bids coming in, almost abnormally high and abnormally quick, uncomfortably so probably. Whereas now we're probably back to what feels slower, but is actually more normal. So as long as it stays some way reasonable and normal, I think we'll be happy. We'll be happy enough. So it's gone from a very high point to a more normal point, and that has been noticeable as well.
What's the sentiment like out there, in relation to buying and selling? Well, we talk about buying because, as you're well aware, in media circles, there seems to be a lot of anger out there in relation to people getting access to a buyer's market. Are you getting any feedback at all like that from your agents throughout the country?
I think the buying pool have been frustrated over the last number of years, really, but particularly in the last year or so. So the buying pool have been put into a position where there's been such little supply. They've had to be, maybe really active in the market, and then found they've been outbid time and time again. So the buying pool has been frustrated. Now they're almost at a point where they're pulling back and softening it and almost throwing in the towel. Maybe, well, if the market's going to change, maybe we'll hang back a little bit as well. So there's definitely a frustration out there. I'm sure anger as well, but they've been frustrated for a long time, and you can't blame them. And I think a certain cohort have now actually thrown in the towel and that, or put the search on hold. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're not seeing the high volume where there might be 80 to 100 people on a file. Now it's generally 10, 20, 30.
And is the supply problem as big as we're hearing at the moment? Supply of homes onto the market.
The supply has been a massive issue for a long time, and will be by a long time, several years. Really? But it's been really exacerbated in the last, from June 2020. It was an awful lot of the supply at that stage was sold quickly once we reopened after. We won't say the C word, but once we got to reopen again, there was a nice amount of supply, still too low, but a nice amount of supply that was on the market. But that got sold very quickly from June, July, August. We had the busiest quarter we ever had in Q3 2020. And that was never replenished. So an awful lot of people who might have sold actually couldn't find anything to move to, or they held back because they didn't want people in their home, or they didn't issue notice to tenants because they didn't want to go down that road at that point in the market. So just the supply wasn't coming through to replenish it. And since then, there has been a really acute shortage of stock of all types of stock.
Has that caused anxiety with estate agents, do you think, or how's the business reacting to that level of lack of supply?
Well, we would work with about 300 estate agents and auctioneers across the country, so we have a good feel for the feedback. And I mean, since we've been in business about 10 years in Ireland, I've never heard them have too well. Actually, that's probably wrong. In the last 5 years, supply has always been a problem. But from agents who are maybe dealing with 30 stock at a given time or 20 stock, a lot of them were in single digits, and some of them down to almost zero at times. So it's been hugely problematic. The only thing I'd say is it's because a lot of it was selling so quickly. It felt like the problem was even greater. A lot of them actually had okay years, last year. It wasn't a bad year, but at any given time, they might have only had 5 or 6 properties as opposed to 20 or 25. But it was just moving so quickly, it was impossible to keep a reasonable, what would seem like a fair and reasonable level of stock at a given time. So it has been a big concern for agents, although maybe at the end of the year, when they look back, maybe the concern, it eased that concern that the sales levels were actually still quite good by the end of the year.
So last
year. Yeah, apologies there, Patrick. I just, wanted to come in on something you mentioned there at the start. You were talking about, in terms of the shifting sentiment, vendors looking to get things maybe sold, done and dusted quickly. Where are your vendors coming from at the moment? Who's your typical vendor at the moment?
So good question. Yeah, we obviously are a platform for agents, so it's dependent on what those agents might have. But what we're seeing a lot of, an increasing amount, is properties that need work are actually a big part of it, or an increasing part of it. And I suppose, okay, there's concerns around the market maybe in general, but add that to a property that needs work, which has a whole different level of concern for a buyer, to see, are they definitely in a position to buy this property and actually take on the works afterwards. So we saw both an increase in sales that had fallen through private treaty, that a buyer had gone ahead, paid probably a good price for it, and then at a latter stage decided, let's get my quotes from my builder and let's actually see what this will cost. And it was turning out to be a bigger project than they envisaged. And maybe some of them, okay, material costs are huge, but to get actually people to do the works as well is a big problem. So a lot of sales fell through that came onto the platform then, that they didn't want that to happen again. And also a good few straight to market that, again, they just foresaw the building costs as a problem, and let's have a more secure route to sale, I suppose. So that would definitely be a noticeable uptake. We are seeing people that had been holding off for quite a while in selling, and not the property wouldn't need work, or it wouldn't be a property that the materials or the building would be an issue, but their own personal circumstances. Maybe they had wanted to move 2 years ago, they held off. So time to move is becoming maybe a more important one as well. So that the process for online auction is about at least half the time it takes to transact in private treaty, and the conveyancing process is a lot shorter. So giving them the security of timeframes as well has been a big one. So they're probably the two drivers.
That latter one is a really interesting one, because for the past at least 2 years, and possibly even slightly longer, estate agents nationwide have been talking about the absolute dearth of secondhand homes coming to the market. They've been trying everything, and they know of sellers who have gotten value, or potential sellers who have gotten valuations and were sitting and waiting, and there wasn't really a clear reason as to why they were waiting, because it was clear that the marketplace was quite hot. There were definitely more buyers than sellers in the marketplace, and the prices being achieved, certainly anytime over the last year, or possibly a little bit longer, you could have considered them prime and most likely peak. So what I think that's a really interesting cohort you're talking about. What can you tell us about them? What's making them sell now? Are they thinking, actually, the market is perhaps about to turn, and this is my last opportunity to sell at what might be, in retrospect, might look back and see as the peak?
I think there's probably two mainstreams. Sure, there's the people who see this as maybe a peak or close to the peak. It's hard to say for sure. But it's certainly a strong market for a seller, and one that would be I would say classified as a seller's market. So there's definitely that cohort. But that has been the case for a year and a half, you could say, or close to it. So why didn't they do it a year ago, I suppose? So I think a lot of them have been waiting either for the right time for themselves personally, maybe an unwillingness to make a move during a difficult time, but a lot of them also circumstances of finding another property, or where they're going to move to. That has held an awful lot of them back. And we're actually seeing a good few vendors who are going to move in with family between that they are going to sell now. They've been trying to find a house, or they've maybe been building. There's actually quite a few, it's a fair point, quite a few of them building, in the process of building a house, and they're just trying to make that happen now. Maybe they need the funds from their sale, and that was always the plan, but they had held back selling it due to the timing with COVID, etc. So I think a lot of the circumstances are people who had a move in the pipeline for quite a while, but maybe didn't have something to move to, or didn't feel it was the right time for them to make that move, maybe move in with family. Maybe they didn't want to do that during COVID times, I suppose. So there's definitely a cohort of that from the movers where time is a big issue, and then obviously the ones where the work is needed. I think they're from a selection of their circumstances can be any sort of range.
Yeah, but that's the seller side. Let's look at the buyers. Do you have a breakdown of what proportion of your buyers or successful buyers are mortgaged, or are they all presenting or mainly presenting as cash buyers?
No, we actually have an increasing, and we've had it for a while. It's I know last year was breaking back around 60% mortgage, which traditionally had been much different to that. I don't know. I don't have the figures for this year, but I would suggest it's similar. Our process is a little different than auction traditionally, where there's one day and you bid on it. Quite often we will have a property going to auction in, we'll say we've an auction on this Thursday, but a huge amount of the properties that were advertised for that will actually be sold beforehand to mortgage buyers generally, actually. So what would happen is a mortgage buyer would come and see it. They'd probably say, look, I'm hoping not to bid at the auction because my finances are mortgage, but I would like to bid prior to the auction, and we will bring those to the vendor for decision. So if someone wants to buy with a mortgage, we'd normally recommend them to get their bank up to speed with their thinking of bidding on this property, get their solicitor to check the legals, make sure they're in a position to actually put in a binding bid, and then they bid by auction, but maybe three weeks ago. So a lot of our sales are done pre-auction to such circumstances. And
so sorry, Pat. So you're actually selling by auction as opposed to selling by the highest bidder. Is that how you're operating?
Yeah, well, it may not go to the end of the auction is more the point. The highest bidder, yeah, sure, and we can open the auction window to bid today as opposed to bidding in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time. Right. So most mortgage buyers tend to need more time, and we understand that as well as the agents. I suppose that the vendors would be well up to speed with this can go to the end of the auction, or if there's buyers, particularly certain types of properties that might be more suited to a mortgage buyer, we would say to them, chances are we'll be seeking bids throughout the process and we'll bring them to you for a decision. So it's up to the vendors really, but quite often if there's a strong bidder and they come in with a binding bid at say 400,000, for instance, we go back to everyone on the file to say a bid has come in at 400. If there's no counter bids, the vendors will often maybe ask for 410 and say I'll take it out of auction if they come a little bit more with a binding bid to buy it today. But that's a big part of our business, and in fairness, that's why agents are using the platform, because they know it's more flexible than maybe just setting a date, which would really be cash buyers only.
Right, and just on that point, sorry, Kat, just on that point, what is what's your feeling in relation to the basically only the two pillar banks, Bank of Ireland now and AIB, the only mortgaging banks there are on the globe now, with KCB putting out? I mean, what's your feeling on that one?
It's a problem. There are other lenders out there, but they're not mainstream lenders. So it's not. I would say there's more than two, and there are some specialist lenders who deal with maybe certain types of properties. But you're right in what you say. With two main street banks offering mortgages, the competition isn't enough. The Irish, obviously, we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And I mean, it's been discussed. There's obviously issues within the Irish market with regard to troublesome loans where banks can't really recoup their losses, and that makes it unattractive. There's other reasons as well. Obviously, there's a bit of central bank obviously control that makes it a bit harder to be in the Irish market, but it is a problem, and we do need to we do need to look at how we can resolve that, because we're not going to attract, by the looks of things, we're not going to attract European banks, and therefore the competition is not going to be strong enough.
It's too small a market, Patrick, for foreign banks to be interested, do you think, from the point of view of competition?
I'm not an expert in banking, but I don't think so, because they can, we've seen them come before. It wasn't too small then. It wasn't the size of the market that lost KBC or Ulster Bank. It was the regulation, and it was the I suppose the legislation around repossessions of family homes. And I'm not advocating for repossessions of family homes, but there's something needs to be done to attract more banks there. We are a small market, there's no doubt about that, but we're within Europe. We're not an inaccessible market, albeit smaller. So I think, even though it's maybe another conversation, maybe for another day, but it is a problem. And in competing in a time when interest rates were coming down for mortgages, it's concerning to see the lack of competition, because I don't think we'll see them come down to where they need to be competitively with Europe, because we're quite high. I think we're the second highest in Europe, or certainly towards the very top.
Very good, thank you. Patrick, we've only really discussed the residential side. What's happening in the commercial side of the market?
So we would deal with about 25% commercial. So have a fair flavour of it, but it wouldn't be 75% would be residential. We are seeing we would deal with a lot of investors who look at commercial, look at residential. They're still buying from an investor point of view. There's probably a bit more caution, as there is with everyone, I think, about the market. But in terms of investors buying commercial, they're still reasonably active. In terms of people buying for their own use, it's harder to gauge, to be honest. There's definitely a more cautious approach to the whole commercial end. Obviously, residential, we know there's not enough supply, full stop. It's probably going to hold, the market is, the lack of supply will support the market and keep the prices probably reasonably strong, even if we go through a tough economic climate. It's not the same with commercial. In different segments of the commercial market, there could be an oversupply. So I think there is an uncertainty around, how much office space do we need? With the new world we live in, where people work from home, is there going to be a big drop off in that? Very hard to say right now.
Well, one of the interesting trends we've seen are rural pubs without licenses attached.
Yeah.
Purchased for change of use for residential or for co-working hubs, and increasingly for coffee shops. So in terms of the trends, the commercial properties, are they attracting as much interest as you would have expected?
The pubs are actually quite high demand right now. We've sold a few hotels and former pubs and licensed premises as well. There is good demand in that sector, if you want to be specific to that.
To retain for hospitality?
If it's a pub without a license, or former pub, I should say, then generally it's for residential. If it's a licensed premises, I suppose it depends on where it is. There's not massive appetite unless it's in a big town, or in a good trading location. Which, in fairness, there's not a lot of those coming on the market. If they're trading well, they're by and large there's not loads of them coming to the fore. So a lot of those regional towns, or maybe less well located pubs, they probably are generally for change of use. And obviously, with the new rules around, you don't need planning if I think it's up to 9 apartments into a former pub. That's quite an attractive option, taking into account most of those pubs are located in places that apartments would rent very comfortably. They're normally somewhere close to the town centre or in the town centre, and the demand would be there for them. So I think we're seeing sold quite a number of pubs lately, and there's good appetite and increasing appetite for them. But at a price as well, I should say. The values of them went well down in the last number of years, so that the values aren't huge, but there is appetite for them.
Well, speaking of value, before we wrap up, what can we expect from your upcoming auctions?
So we've auctions in June and July. So on Thursday, we have quite a number of as I was saying earlier, properties needing work. So they can be cottages, they can be houses in towns, but there's quite a lot of those that would be a bit of value, but need work. In terms of investments, we have a big pre-63 in Drumcondra that's getting quite a lot of interest. We have stuff in Newbridge, we have stuff in Cork, we have stuff in Galway, and good appetite for the investment stuff, both residential and commercial. But a lot of it would be the stuff I'm talking about there is either residential or a mix of residential and commercial. So quite good appetite for those investment ones. And yeah, lots of properties needing work. And then there's quite a few family homes where when I say family homes, good family homes ready to go, whereby the vendors want to move a bit faster. And again, generally priced at the right level, not, if something comes onto the platform with ourselves, generally it's a vendor who wants to move. They're not putting it up for the fun and seeing how it goes. And maybe they might sell, maybe they won't sell. Generally, they're motivated vendors that for some reason want the speed, want the security, and the agents say, well, look, this is a platform that will give you that. So yeah, and as I said earlier, a lot of the properties would have sold already as well. So we've had a busy month of June so far.
Very good. Well, look, that kind of value is what I'm sure prospective home buyers and investors will want to hear. So thank you for that. And congratulations to Patrick Folan, Director of IAm Sold Auction House, and the IAm Sold team on celebrating 10 years in business this year. So congratulations, Patrick, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Carla. I appreciate that as well. It's been a long 10 years, but a good 10 years.
Good to hear. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.